Thank you, Chair and members. Let me start by stating that I am happy to accept the committee amendments and thank the committee for your work on this bill. As amended, AB 1094 imposes a minimum term of 20 years before eligibility for parole for any person convicted of torturing a child under the age of 14 when the perpetrator is in a position of care or custody over the victim. Our children are our most vulnerable citizens. They rely on us to provide a safe and nurturing environment free from cruelty and abuse. Yet too often, the very people tasked with their care betray that trust, inflicting lasting harm on their young lives. In case of child torture, the damage goes far beyond physical injury. It leaves deep psychological scars and alters the course of a child's future. As a physician who provides care to many kids right in the Central Valley, I can attest to the important work that ACES has done to increase trauma screening amongst children and the work that physicians do to make sure that we capture a lot of the abuse that's been happening. Under current law, a life sentence for torture carries a minimum term of only 7 years. This statutory minimum does not reflect the profound and enduring harm inflicted on a child who is subject to such a horrific abuse. Consider the tragic case of a 10-year-old who endured unimaginable suffering at the hands of her caregiver, a case that left a judge lamenting the inadequacy of the sentencing the law allowed him to impose. AB 1094 directly addresses this failing by ensuring that perpetrators of such heinous crimes are sentenced to a minimum of 20 years behind bars instead of just 7. Critics argue that existing law provides sufficient safeguards. However, our experience tells us that these measures fall short. This bill is designed to close the loopholes in our sentencing framework that have allowed offenders to reenter society far too early, putting more children at risk of further harm. And as a physician, I can attest I've seen many cases in the clinic of kids that have been abused by perpetrators who re-enter society and continue that abuse. Furthermore, this legislation is a call to accountability. It recognizes that crimes of torture, especially when committed against children, are not merely violations of the law, they are profound betrayals of public trust and humanity. By raising the minimum term for such offenses, we not only honor the suffering of the victims, but also strengthen our community's confidence that justice will be rigorously and fairly served. Passing AB 1094 reaffirms our commitment to justice, ensures that those who inflict unimaginable pain on our children face the full consequences of their actions, and strengthens our collective resolve to safeguard every child. With me in support, I have Bethel Cope Vega with the Orange County District Attorney's Office.
Good afternoon. My name is Bethel Cope Vega. I've been a Deputy District Attorney in Orange County for about 10 years. My caseload consists entirely of serious and complex child abuse and child homicide cases. To be clear, it is my honor to fight for these vulnerable victims. So, as you probably know, torture is one of the most heinous crimes that can be committed in California, and it requires inflicting great bodily injury with plain cruelty. By definition, torture requires a sadistic intent. And as current law stands, the punishment for torture is a potential life sentence with the possibility of parole after just 7 years. But the torture of a child is an even more cruel and depraved crime. Children are inherently vulnerable, and their injuries tend to be more serious because of the vast size difference between their perpetrator and their victim. If you don't know, babies' bones actually break differently, and their brains get injured in a different way. And child torture is almost always at the hands of a caretaker. It's a parent, it's a nanny, it's a step-parent, a family member. Child victims rely on and trust in their perpetrators. The very person who is supposed to protect them betray them. I think of Valeria, who was singled out from her siblings who had also turned against her. She was almost 3, but she was the size of a 10-month-old when she presented to the hospital with a deep stab wound with knife carvings and burn marks all over her body, caused by both her mother and her father and their efforts to get back at each other. I think of Aiden, who was only 2 when his new stepmom taunted him, mutilated his genitals, and systematically beat his head on a wall. He is now 7. He's paralyzed on the left side of his body and so developmentally disabled that he will never be able to live independently. And I think of 10-year-old Natalie. She was zip-tied to the TV stand by her wrists and her ankles with a pee pad under her for months. And that's when she wasn't being thrown hog-tied into furniture or ice baths. She endured over 17 surgeries and 5 months in the hospital and will never again walk or run normally. Her 5 siblings who were in the house with her were forced to participate by tying her up and withholding food. They were threatened with torture too if they didn't participate. I told the jury in that case that although Natalie's physical torture has ended, the mental torture for her and her siblings is just beginning as they grow up attempting to make sense of what they've lived through. For these young victims, a parole hearing after 7 years is just too soon. Healing, both physically and mentally, takes years, which is interrupted by having to prepare for that traumatic parole hearing. Even when parole isn't granted, hearings typically get reset every 3 years. If we look at sentencing schema for sex crimes against children, which are also heinous, but those crimes are crimes where the perpetrator can often convince themselves that the child actually enjoys the act, sentencing regularly allows for multiple enhancements of 25 to life. But in child torture cases where cruel sadism is actually baked in, it is an element of the crime. Right now, the punishment is parole after only 7 years, and it is simply not enough. Let's allow these children, the ones lucky enough to survive, to grow up without the shadow of their victimhood looming. For the child survivors who have suffered unspeakable acts of cruelty, who were failed once already at the hands of a trusted protector, let's not fail them going forward. I respectfully ask for your aye vote today.
Thank you for your presentation, Assembly Member, and for your testimony, ma'am.